All right, hello everybody out there who's watching. Welcome to our HackSurfer Hangout. We're going to be talking about cloud security today. We have three panelists with us. We have Adam Meyer. He's the Chief Security Strategist at SurfWatch Labs. He's replacing Jason Polacich, who's out sick today. Then we got Willie Leichter. He's the Global Director of Cloud Security at CipherCloud. And we got Raj Nagaratnam. He's the IBM Distinguished Engineer and CTO for Security Solutions. So welcome everybody. If anyone out there is watching, we do kind of have open Q&A. So if you're watching on Google+, there's a Q&A app which should be open as you're watching. You can type in questions, vote them up and down, and we'll try to get those answered before the end of the hour. But I guess to kick it off, I was posting about this hangout that we're having a couple days ago in one of the Google communities, and someone made an interesting comment. They said that the cloud is the most overused, underdefined term in human history. Kind of like Internet of Things, I hear people complain about that all the time. So I don't know if someone just kind of wants to take a stab, just kind of maybe framing this discussion of what the cloud is. I don't know, Adam, maybe if you want to start?
Sure, thanks. I think the cloud term, if you will, has probably gone along the lines of big data, Internet of Things, just kind of a generalist type of term. Hey, let's just send it to the cloud and go do this and go do that. So I think it does get overused, and it probably doesn't do what the different cloud services are justice, if you will, since you have public, private, hybrid type of clouds, all with different service offerings and different service providers for the cloud environment. So. And I also think it's just becoming more the norm, right? So you have a lot of providers out there, a lot of competition, and a lot of vendors are providing a lot of new products to different customer bases. So you're starting to see an increase in the term's usage. That's kind of my perception of it.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, throw in a comment. So yeah, it's overused. It's an old telecom term from the 70s. I think it all depends on who you're talking to. From my perspective, we work with a lot of large businesses that used to run big data centers. So it is in their mind, the cloud is synonymous with moving a lot of infrastructure, outsourcing it essentially in a very significant way. So it's, it depends who you ask, but it represents a lot of big trends that are happening kind of all at once.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And when we look at enterprises, we see three categories, but it's kind of becoming two. So customers are moving their applications, whatever they had in the data center, they're extending their data center to the cloud. That's typically referred as infrastructure as a service, infrastructure cloud. It could be IBM SoftLayer, or it could be Amazon, or someone like that. Or they're building new apps in the cloud, in which case it's a platform as a service. You get database out there, you get messaging. So the purpose of why they are moving to the cloud will define what type of cloud it is. And on the other hand, more what we see out there is businesses are saying, okay, my core business is manufacturing. I don't want to deal with HR or sales processes, and they will say, let me consume applications as a service. So that's where software as a service comes into play. So yeah, cloud term has been cloudy, but I think it's getting around these three areas of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service more and more.
Yeah, I was looking at a study from CipherCloud, and in there it said 83% of organizations have adopted the cloud for some function, and the cloud market is expected to grow by 126.5% this year. So I'm just kind of curious, looking at it from a business perspective, what in particular is growing in the cloud? Is it something that you can kind of generalize, or is it kind of varied depending on industry sector or business? Or I don't know, Willie, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll take a high-level stab. I think there's multiple things that are lumped together in the cloud. What we're seeing on the business end I put them in three buckets right now. There's a huge increase in shadow IT, which means people bring their own apps to work. They bring their smartphones. They access whatever they want. They're doing all kinds of things that are now. And it's very hard for businesses to shut them down. You either turn off everything, which doesn't really work, or it's kind of the Wild West now with people using the cloud on their own. Then there's another bucket of applications that are becoming popular and are sanctioned, and companies buy into them, and they're using them. but there's still a lot of concerns because there's not that much visibility on what people are actually doing, like sharing files, online collaboration tools. And then there's a third bucket, which are big infrastructure projects that companies are building in the cloud and designing around the cloud, and they're essentially, instead of building in a data center, they're building in the cloud. So they're kind of different dynamics that we see in each of those three.
Mm-hmm.
And from our viewpoint, similar. I mean, what Willie was sharing, we see similar dynamics. It also depends on the size of the company and what they do. And but one thing that we see prominently is the applications that Willie talked about, consuming these business applications as a service. You have Salesforce to deal with Salesforce automation, or Office 365 to deal with the collaboration, or IBM's Connexa to deal with HR. So those are examples, but basically for those more and more companies, they're saying, okay, it's the next step of outsourcing, right? So instead of doing this as a core part of IT, let me get it from the experts out there, and so that is definitely more. So every company will have something to do with SaaS. If they don't know it, just that it's a shadow IT, to Willie's point. The other thing is, which varies company to company, is how much are they taking their stuff in the data center out to the cloud. For those traditional company enterprises who have invested heavily in the IT, they're taking incremental steps, moving to infrastructure as a service and moving their compute and network or application capabilities to the cloud. Whereas new companies that are coming up and saying, hey, I want to build a new business and I want to quickly have something up and running, they don't have the luxury to set up an IT department. So in that context, they quickly move to the infrastructure clouds and platform clouds.
I'll just admit one other thing, just adding on to your point. There's a lot of newer companies that I call cloud natives. It's kind of like the digital natives. You have a certain generation. There are new companies that are starting out where they've always been in the cloud, and frankly, it's a big advantage because they're not migrating. So it's very analogous to the kids who grew up with the internet.
But I think also, Willie, even the larger organizations are kind of going down that road because in previous experiences, rolling information out to the cloud and past IT departments, it always started as an overhead reduction function. So we're looking to migrate systems out to the cloud because the IT departments didn't have a lot of project resources to dedicate to the things that needed dedicated development, right? So it's your email, your collaboration, those type of things. Get it off our plate and send it out to the cloud because I don't want to deal with it anymore. But also when new initiatives came online, a lot of CIOs I worked with in the past said, what's the cloud offer from the get-go, right? Because we don't want to sink our resources back into that line of business again. So I think there's some hybrid there going on.
Yeah, and kind of moving forward then to more of a security discussion, that same CipherCloud study that I quoted earlier cited security was the #1 concern for IT professionals. But then also what I thought was interesting is that it said defining what secure even means can be difficult. So I mean, we talked a little bit about how people are confused about the cloud, but it sounds to me like when it comes to cloud security, there might be some confusion among security professionals. I don't know if anyone wants to chat about that. Maybe Raj, do you find that at all?
I find that, I wouldn't say as much as a confusion, but more of they need help on where to begin and how to go about it. We went through the web era, the online era, when people were trying to move to the web, and they were trying to figure out how to secure their web applications. They're in the same state now. They're saying, like the discussions we had till last few minutes about what is cloud. So getting a handle on what the cloud is, and then how do they move to the cloud? What are the steps that they need to do? What is the risk that is involved in their data or applications as they move to the cloud becomes important. So they're trying to get a grasp of it. Some companies are much mature in their thinking compared to others. And the other thing that throws a wrench into this is you need to work with a cloud provider. So it's no longer everything is in your data center, in your building, etc. Now you need to work with someone. So that shared responsibility that you need to have with cloud provider they're trying to get a grasp around it as to what they provide, what is it something that you as a company need to bring on. So it's less of a confusion, or we can call it. They're trying to look at a structured approach. And with what we have been working with significant number of customers and companies out there, I think we have a structured approach that has been working well with our customers. I'll share it as we get into some of those details. But they're seeking help, and there is structure evolving in the industry, and I'm sure all of us have point of views that are one way or the other helping them.
Yeah, I'll add, and I agree with everything you said. I'll add that I wouldn't say it's confusion, but it's huge disruption in the way IT works. So a lot of cloud initiatives are driven by lines of business now, and often just trying to bypass IT, and that causes problems. But also, IT, I think it's fundamentally changing now from an enterprise perspective, because you used to have a perimeter. You used to have your boundary, you keep the good stuff in, keep the bad guys out, lock down the firewall, and think you're secure. The perimeter now has disappeared. So it's a real challenge, and I think a lot of IT, a lot of security people try to take the same mindset that, well, I had firewalls here, I got to make sure my cloud provider has that same secure infrastructure. And in our view, that should be table stakes. You're outsourcing the infrastructure, you need to trust the provider, but now you need to think about how are you going to add security to your own data. And it's a real shift of mindset, going from securing your own infrastructure or someone else's infrastructure to actually protecting what you care about. It's harder to do.
Yeah, Willie hit the nail on the head, because in past positions I've managed a couple different cloud initiatives, and very quickly you start realizing you're doing traffic analysis at the port protocol service level. You're looking, depending on the service you're looking to push out to the cloud, is going to dictate the level of sensitivity, likely what business processes that data is supporting, which is going to kind of give you your comfort zone from a security standpoint. Then you start realizing you have to extend your security stack with a concert of the provider. So now I have to extend what's my data loss prevention capabilities with this vendor, what's my authentication stack going to be, what's my incident response, and who's accountable for what when a breach occurs or anything along those lines happen. And you start realizing that other groups within the IT department may not be as comfortable either, or there may be some hidden costs that you didn't realize, or some legal issues were not ironed out ahead of time between making sure what the vendor is liable for versus the customer is liable for, because there should definitely be some agreements there. And I think it's gets a lot of security folks out of their comfort zone. To Willie's point, they haven't gone through that drill before. Everything was kept internal. All the data traffic was internal. Chatty traffic within their known data center. Now they're pumping data from internal to external and having extra handshakes going with different people and different hands in a cookie jar. So I think there's that drives some hesitation. Gets out of their comfort zone, makes extra analysis required, and I think that's where the confusion comes in.
Yeah, and we have a question out there from Matt. He just wants to know what security issues should businesses be concerned about when utilizing the cloud. I think we're kind of touching on a little bit. Is the main shift in risk then just kind of that shared responsibility when moving, to the cloud, or is there any other things that kind of change when you sort of shift that approach?
Yeah, I'll maybe start. I think there is some level of shared responsibility, obviously, and you need to select good, reliable cloud vendors, and you should do all your due diligence. But I think there's boundaries that, particularly if you have data that's sensitive or personal information, credit cards, a lot of business information is regulated or sensitive, there are privacy laws around it. And that shared responsibility really stops there. The cloud providers are not going to take responsibility for your data. That's not their business. They'll secure the infrastructure. But I think businesses really need to get a better handle on what information is important to them, what's potentially damaging, what might be they would worry about a data breach. And frankly, a lot of times when the data was all inside your network, a lot of people had a false sense of security and didn't really worry that much, or didn't categorize their data well. So now when it's outside, you got to know your data better, and you got to understand the risks, do a lot more risk analysis.
Right. I agree with the data point as well. So I see there are three imperatives that are predominantly coming up through what we see out there. We work with a lot of chief security officers and the security teams and their IT and application teams as well. And what we have honed in on these patterns, one is around identity, the users. Because ultimately you need to figure out who is using the cloud or what administrator is changing the systems, is he bringing that down, or who the end user is accessing your cloud application. So many times it starts with the user as to figuring out who they are, what are they doing, and whether they have the right to get in. And that in the context of cloud, it expands out because user may come in from their mobile device or a on-premise enterprise. So it's around the users. Another one around data, like Willie said, it shapes the thinking. The earlier discussion, the comfort zone is, hey, put your perimeters around it, but now they need to think hard about what data are they putting out in the cloud. So it needs to start with classifying the data. So it's actually an opportunity to do security right when it comes to cloud. We believe in that, right? So protecting data, and it's just not about data encryption or anything only, but you need to worry about the application and the vulnerabilities that serve up the data. So the second one is, how do you figure out, classify, manage the risk around the data and protect the data that you move to the cloud. And the third, this is a very important one, because the loss of control that they fear about and the confusion and whatever terms we want to see, they want to have full visibility. They have full visibility to what is happening in their data centers, but when they move to cloud, they worry about it. So wanting full visibility around what is happening, are there attacks happening, who's accessing what, is my systems secure, whatever that what in their policy means, right? So having full visibility and intelligence around access and threats, and given every advanced threat that is happening out there. So those three things, they want to know who the users and their access, they want to protect the data, and have full visibility. So I would say what changes in the approach they need to take, it should be a three-pronged approach there.
Yeah, sure. I would agree with both of them. It's definitely a data governance drill first. I think it's what business purpose is the requirement serving, right? Obviously, if you're going to get any kind of application as a service or infrastructure as a service, you're trying to fulfill a business need, and the data that's supporting that business need will give you your liabilities that are tied to it. What's the risk of that data from a regulatory standpoint or your traditional cyber threat standpoint? You're still going through a risk assessment type of process and a threat assessment as well. And then you're going to go look at the push and pull mechanisms of that data as it interacts with the cloud provider and the users, and where those users are. Are they centrally managed? Are they distributed users? Authentication and identity management is very large, as well as encryption. And you're going to have to go through and make sure that as data moves through the pipeline, who is the custodian of it, what is their role in the custody of that data and processing that data, and what's your security stack need to be at each stage within that. When it's internal to your environment, quote, trusted environment internally, you have endpoint monitoring, you may have behavioral and signature-based analytics running against the traffic. What does normal look like in your environment? Who's accessing what data? How are you auditing that data? How is that data backed up? All this type of typical security controls. But once you go to a cloud provider, you are relinquishing control of that security stack or portions of to the cloud provider. And you have to make sure that when that handoff occurs, you're handing it off, and the vendor is picking that stack up in accordance with whatever the agreements, when you procure the service. Make sure that that same security stack is getting picked up on the other end, and that way you have a bit of that end-to-end comfort, if you will. You may not have full visibility because the vendor's got their own ecosystem that they're going to operate, but you at least have some assurances in place that the security requirements are being taken care of.
Yeah, and Raj, you kind of talked about what data people put in the cloud. So I wanted to get your thought on this. I saw this article this morning. It's the end of the year. Everyone's sort of talking about trends for 2015 and making their predictions. And one of the predictions I read in this article, it says cloud adoption will not continue its stratospheric climb in 2015. Between the Snowden effect and a number of cloud services leaking data, organizations will be more concerned with where they put sensitive information. This doesn't mean businesses will stop using the cloud where it makes sense. It just proves that we can't put everything in the cloud. So just kind of curious your thoughts on that, if that's something you agree with, or if you think that's not an accurate prediction.
I mean, you should. I think it's a reflection of people now realizing that they need to worry about what they put in the cloud. It's more that's what I see. So I think I agree in the principle of the statement about people will now be more cautious. They will assess the risk. It's all. There's nothing. I would be the first one to agree that nothing is 100% secure. Is it secure enough to the risk that you're managing? So that's where, as a personal user, am I going to put my tax documents out there, my social security numbers and family information out there? Or will I just put something, right, as an end user I can think about it? From an enterprise perspective, are you moving your, say, intranet portal? Are you moving your dev test work environments? Are you moving your financial data? Or when you use a HR service, you upload your employees' data, right? So in terms of the data that you're moving to the cloud, I believe in 2015 there will be much more structured way to think about it in terms of what is it that I'm doing in the cloud, what controls do I have based on the risk that I'm taking for the data that I'm moving. So the principle of the statement that you read out there in the report is people will have probably more structured approach. So this goes back to the earlier discussion Adam was also pointing out in terms of assessments, right? So I believe companies now have a structured way. We see many companies now revisiting their corporate policies in terms of their cloud adoption. So it's a natural evolution and a natural next step in terms of this whole adoption. So yes, customers are revisiting their policies. It's not like they're not going to move to cloud. They are, but they are going to figure out what is it that they're moving. Is it the risk that they're willing to take? And according to the risk, what controls, technologies, and solutions they need to adopt so that they can be comfortable in moving into the cloud.
I'll maybe be a bit provocative, and I agree with everything you said, Raj, but the cloud adoption is not slowing down. It's hitting the mainstream. We work with a lot of very conservative enterprises, banks, financial services, healthcare, and they are at the early stages of a mass migration of infrastructure. And if you look at it, look at the number of data centers around the country. It's shrunk by tenfold in the last few years. Those data centers are consolidating. They're not coming back. Once companies start using and getting the benefits of the cloud, you can't be competitive without it. So that's the reality. Even though they're naysayers with legitimate concerns that the cloud, that I told you so, you can't trust the cloud. Now, what Raj said is I totally agree with. You have to be smarter about it. You have to be more cautious. You have to understand your data. But the underlying trends are not slowing down from what we see. They're actually continue to accelerate.
Yeah, I would agree with both the gentlemen and also say I think it's going to be steady. I think any new capabilities that come on across the CIO's desk are going to be looking for a cloud provider first when they're doing their analysis of alternatives, because there's a lot of sustainment costs internally, a lot of whether it's software, hardware, or labor tied to running your internal data center. And it's a lot easier to outsource those type of things to turnkey. And as well as when major applications come up for or reach end of life from a life cycle standpoint with whatever version or vendor they're currently hosting and internally, right? So if you got a large payroll, ERP, anything along those lines, when that environment starts to reach end of life, they're going to start looking for that cloud provider to kick it off to and maintain sustainment for that service.
And the better apps are all going to be in the cloud moving forward. You mentioned Salesforce. There's so much you can do so quickly with Salesforce that you just can't do with your legacy, $3 million internal CRM system. So I agree. Those decisions are just, they're snowballing because it just doesn't make business sense. You can't get it done. All the best technology now is going to be in the cloud.
That's right. And the security teams, we increasingly see them who have been traditionally a Mr. No has to become a Dr. S. Ultimately figuring out how to enable these guys, right? So that is exactly what is happening in terms of enabling their IT, enabling their business to adopt cloud, and figuring out smarter ways to do that.
Yeah, and Will, you kind of mentioned, how you really see it growing, and you think, all the good stuff's going to come from the cloud. We have another question out there from the viewers. Says, will the cloud eventually replace all traditional storage devices? So I'm kind of curious if you ever think there's a reason, I guess, not to use the cloud.
Yeah, and I think we touched on it before that there's always going to be a hybrid model. So there'll be some things that are kept internally, but I think it's more that the majority of applications and kind of infrastructure is going to be based in the cloud. I think storage, there'll still be a lot of different storage models depending on what makes sense. There's also a lot of different models of encryption or tokenization where you are, protecting your crown jewels in additional ways. So that'll remain hybrid, but the cost of storage is becoming so commoditized in the cloud as well. So I think there's a lot of economic incentives to move a lot of the data to the cloud.
Yeah. No, I agree with Willie. There are two points here, right? One is there is going to be a hybrid model. That is pretty much what we see, especially with enterprises. There's no doubt about it. And to the question on storage, it's about what are you storing. And so the crown jewels, the high-value business asset, ultimately data is the new currency. If so, that critical things, critical data, crown jewels will be kept closer to the enterprise, therefore they will have on-prem deployments until they get comfortable. And so whatever they move will be those of lesser risky in classification that they will start to move, in which case they get stored up in the cloud and we'll use the storage mechanisms there.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say based on the trends I'm seeing is a very much a hybrid approach. User type of data, absolutely in the cloud, no brainer there. You shouldn't have file servers or anything from shared drives or anything locally, especially with all the ransomware that's going around nowadays. You should just be using things like Google Drive, Office 365, OneDrive type stuff for your personal usage. And then on the back end, again, if you're pushing a lot of your major high transactional applications to the cloud, the storage is going to be local with that provider 99.9% of the time. So you're going to see a lot of that information go out there. The only thing I usually see internally is anything that has a very high performance threshold from a processing overhead, depending on the environment. I saw that a lot in the industrial side, right? Obviously, a lot of the industrial controls are going to be very local, very business specific, a very specific reason why they're local. But anything business, if you will, should be pushed out.
And I use the term crown jewels, which is really a bad analogy because there's very little business data that exists in a vault that doesn't need to interact with other people. So most inherently, your data is going to go places. You've got partners. Outside. There's sensitivity of data, obviously, and there's levels of security, but there's very little useful data that's locked in a vault and never accessed by anyone.
Yeah, and before we kind of get into the, maybe some of like the negative stuff that businesses are doing wrong or some of the security stuff, a few people I've talked to about, just cloud security in general have sort of made the point that, for a small business, for example, there can be a lot of benefits security-wise to using the cloud. Obviously Amazon's going to be probably more secure than, whatever you're going to be able to throw together on a small budget. So just kind of wondering if anyone wants to maybe take a stab at that. Maybe Adam, do you see any benefits security-wise to the cloud?
I mostly do. I see more challenges because of that learning curve that a lot of typical cybersecurity pros have to go through. But I definitely see a lot of savings from a program management standpoint. Anything I can push to the cloud, I'm reducing my vulnerability management overhead, right? It takes tools, it takes labor to manage all those vulnerabilities from a hosting environment standpoint. I'm also, taking on some identity management and authentication challenges because now times I got to federate authentication stack where I didn't have to federate before. Not that it's not achievable, it's just is it the right thing for your environment, your architecture. As well as I'm actually rendering a lot of things into a web service by pushing things into the cloud. I push things to web service, I can throw two-factor authentication a lot of times in front of it. I can render it for different environments. I can use virtual desktop type environments to get in, interact with the data from a distributed workforce standpoint. So a lot of those types of things start playing into the equation. I am a fan of pushing things to the cloud smartly and going through that risk assessment and going application by application, business purpose by business purpose, and making sure everything's good to go from that handshake, and when the data is internal being used by the user versus being pushed out to the vendor, and that entire security stack's being accommodated by a provider, whether it's your own staff as the provider or the cloud provider is performing the security function as a service. So I think there is some push and pull from a good pro versus con standpoint, but I definitely think it's more pro.
Yeah, I believe so too. I believe cloud has actually an opportunity to do security right, because you can redo things in a way as you move to the cloud. We talked about data and classification, so that you figure out what is it that you're moving. But if you flip the coin and think about it, what has happened over the last 15 years or so with the online and web and so on, the whole network perimeters, people just put walls around the castle and said everything inside is secure, and they just had hypersegmentation of networks and VLANs, and it's a nightmare. Now they're trying to figure out where the data is and do discovery and classification. But when they move to the cloud, instead of thinking about networks and so on, now I believe what are called applications perimeters or application zones, right? More around the data. So that now you know what is it that you're moving, you put controls around it, and you can do the right users get in, so authentication and authorization that Adam talked about, what level of data protection you need that Willie talked about, having full visibility to that in terms of it could be compliance reasons, it could be for your own security intelligence reasons, so that you know what is going on. So taking a structured approach here, you can actually do security better. And if you think in the larger scheme of things, there are, of course, the big banks who have an army of personnel who are security skilled, but one key trend we see out there is lack of security skills. So as IBM, we work with universities to get these security skills up, even in the as they graduate. But if you think about that problem of security skills and the need for security skills in these things, moving to the cloud actually helps, because there are experts. It could be managed security services from IBM or others who can help them manage it for you, or do assessments for you, right? And as well as when you host it in a trusted cloud provider who have a secure infrastructure, they know what they do, how they deal with data, what the regulations are, and put controls around it and monitor the infrastructure. Now you have an army of skilled people and technology and resources that the cloud provider brings on, which you cannot afford as a smaller company maybe, right? So in that sense, it is actually an opportunity to do security right, both from a larger enterprise perspective who are getting into a hybrid cloud, as well as smaller companies that are getting into this whole cloud, or born in the cloud, like Willie said.
Mm-hmm.
I would add, and I agree 100%. You know, I have no doubt that my files I store on Box are safer than what's on my home PC. But I think there is also good cloud and bad cloud. We do a lot of audits of shadow IT cloud apps that people bring into the office, and file sync and share is a good example where there are some excellent vendors, well known. Obviously, you need to implement them well. But then there's hundreds and hundreds of knockoff applications. If you do a search for free file sharing, you can find, I found 300 of them recently. You know, instead of Dropbox, you can find Zippy Share, where you just drag and drop a file. Who knows where it goes to? No use of SSL. So there's a dark, you know, freeware universe out there that's expanding as well that people need to be cautious about.
Yep.
But also, if I can make one final point, Jeff, I was just kind of thinking about this as we were going through this discussion, is I would like to ask all of the listeners and the panel, when you look at all of the recent breaches, right, Target, Home Depot, Sony, you know, whatever's the breach du jour of the day, each one of those incidents seem to always point back to lack of basic maintenance in the form of vulnerability management. And a lot of times that's occurring because IT departments can't keep up with the quantity of vulnerabilities coming out, sustaining their systems. They're running a lot of projects, and they're blowing off the maintenance, if you will, and they're stretched thin. Pushing those services to the cloud takes that aggravation off the local IT department. Let the respectable, a reputable cloud provider who's been in the game a long time and does it well, take those services off your back and go handle those so that the IT department can then focus on other critical services. How's the data coming from point A to point B? What's your authentication and authorization stack look like? How can I implement other services for the workforce that's going to make them more enabled to go do their job more efficiently and ultimately bring in revenue for the organization, because that's their purpose. So if anybody just self-reflects for a couple of minutes, every breach isn't a big major APT type event. They're exploiting vulnerabilities that theoretically shouldn't have been there in the first place. And outsourcing that type of work to a cloud provider, they can spin VMs up anywhere they need to spin VMs that are pre-hardened and provide that secure service ready to go at the click of a button. Just takes a lot of that risk away right off the bat.
Right, and in that kind of thinking, right, talking about the kind of points Adam made, one other key trend in the context of cloud that we haven't discussed till now, we talked about IT, infrastructure movement, or storing data in SaaS, but there's another trend. I mean, when we look at applications that are built by enterprises, it's no longer these applications are built in a 12-month life cycle. You have a project kickoff, and after that, after 6 months, you checkpoint, and 12 months later, you deliver. We are completely moving into a DevOps model, a continuous delivery model, where updates are given and provided every day, every week, or even maybe an hour, depending on what the service is about. When you think through that model of development and ops coming together, and just continually delivering code and hosting the application out there, security has to be an intrinsic part of it. So a couple of things that we see when we work with our customers, one is all these application teams are spinning up these apps and hosting it out there. It's not like you can put a DMZ and put a authentication proxy in front, reverse proxy, and do the authentication because it's out there in the cloud. So they're looking for a consistent way to get security as APIs, so they can call a consistent API and say, authenticate this user, as an example, for them to single sign on, to authenticate, to access control. Because first thing first, they want to know who the user is as they serve up, as an example, right? So consuming these services as APIs become important, so that now you can integrate that into your DevOps model, into your application. And as you roll out, you can then start to scan these applications. So you have a web app. Now, as part of your DevOps, you can do a security scanning. We just launched some of our capabilities around application security for either web apps or even mobile apps. You can upload an Android APK file to the cloud, and our app scan service will scan it for you and tell you what the vulnerabilities are. So what is happening is a shift of these long, prolonged projects that get managed and you roll out, but into a continuous delivery model. And now we need to adapt, as vendors, we need to adapt to that, and we are starting to provide these to address that fashion, so that you can now inject into your lifecycle, your development lifecycle, as well as consume these as APIs that the developers can integrate with.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I wanted to ask you guys about. I was talking to someone from over at TM Forum not too long ago, and they work with a whole bunch of different businesses, and he was the security guy there, and he basically, came in with all these ideas for what he's going to do for security, but, working with the businesses, he realized that, everyone's rushing so fast to get stuff to market that security is often an afterthought. So like kind of like you're talking about with like DevOps and stuff, I'm just wondering if you think that that's maybe causing more problems security-wise with all the stuff that businesses are developing. I don't know if someone wants to, maybe Willie, you want to go ahead?
Kind of extending what we were saying before, I think on the one hand, yeah, there are a lot of fast-moving, business-driven initiatives now, and people expect more faster because of the consumerization of IT. So often, compliance officers, CISO types, are having to, put the brakes on or be the bad guys there. But I think there's a base level of security now that you get with the platforms. It's built in, so that's part of what makes it so much faster. You're not deploying physical servers, you're not validating them. All of, so much of the network infrastructure is just ready to go and very secure. But I think it comes back to thinking through some of the basics about compliance and risk management that often get bypassed or not thought about in the first round of these fast-moving initiatives.
Yeah, to add to that, one key shift I see happening in the way organizations are organizing themselves is, yes, security has always been an afterthought, or more likely, especially from other like application and business line of business, they usually say, oh, security is my security team's problem. They'll take care of it. I'll do whatever I want. So that attitude has to change, and it's starting to change. The way I see this changing is the security officers, the CISOs, are now having partners from each of the line of business and say, you guys have to sign this out, right? So when you roll out a new service or an application in the cloud or move your workloads to the cloud or data, you have to declare what the risk is, what the classification is, and let's work together. And you have a skin in the game. So what that happens is the skin in the game brings liability from their perspective. So it's forcing the governance. My point is security has been an afterthought, and now it's forcing into the context of be it DevOps and continuous delivery model. It makes it easier for them to think through it. But in terms of even governance, in addition to the risk management practices that Adam and Willie talked about, this collaborative model about line of business teams, application teams having skin in the game on classifying the data and investing in the right level of security measures goes a long way. And given all the breaches and the headlines out there, it's a boardroom discussion. So when they go up and tell their C-level officers and CEOs saying, oh, we need to do it right in security, I don't think they're getting any pushback, because everyone wants to make sure what they are doing is secure enough for the risk that they are taking on.
I'll just add, with the Target breach, it's not only the breach, but seeing the chain of command that lost their jobs. That certainly put a chilling effect, or made a lot of. It wasn't just the IT people; it was the CIO and then the CEO. So people realize now it is a boardroom issue, and they do have to collaborate. And there's a lot of positive signs that well-run organizations are doing that.
I think it's one final point on this question is also to make sure that the lines of demarcation between data custodian and data owner are clear. Going to the business unit, when you look at the risk of the data and the purpose of the data and the information that the application the IT is serving up is to perform a business function of some sort, right? So the business unit is requesting this functionality, and the IT department's just on the hook to deliver. And I think it's important to make sure that the business unit is involved, because they're the ones who should know the value of that data. What value does it bring to the organization, maybe from a revenue generation standpoint, like sales data or anything along those lines? Is it intellectual property? If compromised, what would be the business impact there? What's the regulatory liabilities? Let's say it's like credit card data from a PCI perspective, or health data from a HIPAA perspective, that if it's breached, the business unit should be experts in knowing what those thresholds are, so that the security teams can understand how much security is good enough for the level of liability this data has, right? And that's going to generate the requirements when you're negotiating with your cloud provider about how much security is good enough, right? So if nobody understands what the liabilities of the data is, how do you know what countermeasures you need to deploy to protect it, right? It's that old adage, you don't spend $1,000 to protect $100 worth of data. It doesn't make sense. So you have to make sure the business units are involved and you're communicating with them, as well as them understanding the risk they're assuming by buying this service, right? They're asking the IT department to perform something on behalf of them. So they should be able to articulate what the value of the data is, as well as records retention. Simple things like that, or I should say, you think are simple things, but records retention, getting an answer out of a business unit is like pulling teeth. And so when the more data you keep in-house, the more liability you hold. And the best way to protect data in my book is to get rid of it, right? If it's past retention, get rid of it, get it out the door. You don't have to protect it anymore. So those type of things are really going to be important to bring the business units into the conversation.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to that is we talked so much about data, and we also talked about users and authentication. So when you look at users, identity, right, that gets revisited now in terms of who has access to what, and the governance that you need to put in place in terms of which employees in an employee-based scenario you may have, which employees have access to which applications and which data, and which customers can access which functionality in terms of the users. And more in terms of the cloud administrators, the privileged users. Imagine the challenge that we have, the administrators passing around their username and password and sharing a shared ID. It's a nightmare. So managing privileged users is now starting to have better control in the enterprises. It's now extended out to the cloud, so that you know who's actually spinning up a VM, who's bringing down a storage system, or who's changing network configuration. So having more control over access around access governance, as well as identifying the user. Because a user coming from an employee, sales guy coming from Starbucks within his hometown may be okay. He should have access to the data that he needs to close the deal. But within the next 30 minutes, if the same user is coming from Australia as opposed to North America, there is something fishy. So having the intelligence of what is happening, where are the requests coming in from the user perspective, and correlating that with and detecting the anomalies. So it's about identity and intelligence coming together, so that you have better control over what is happening, which users are accessing, and what your governance policies are is very important. So the whole notion around managing access and gaining visibility, when you combine them, the powerful aspect to have better governance, better risk management of your cloud applications and infrastructure is paramount.
Yeah, I'm wondering, to get your guys' thoughts, just maybe if you have any specific examples, like as you're working with businesses or you're talking with them, are there any like big mistakes that stand out to you that they make, or kind of trends that you kind of see again and again, just in terms of mistakes along cloud security? I don't know, Willie, maybe if you want to start.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. I think probably most mistakes happen when businesses move too fast, even though I've been a proponent of it is fast moving, or they're not collaborating. I think Raj has described it very well, where it has to be an interactive process. You have to plan ahead and build security into that. I think we're seeing improvements there. I think also a lot of mistakes, as I was saying before, where people are not thinking about the data, they're just thinking about the infrastructure itself, and really they need to move beyond that. I think some of the areas where we're seeing a lot of concern as well, if you have a good cloud provider, I think they generally have excellent secure infrastructure, but now there's a big wave of many more attempts at account hijacking. So they're not attacking the cloud infrastructure, they're attacking the accounts, looking for using Trojans, a lot of old style stuff, more advanced Trojans, trying to steal credentials. So dealing with that threat of where you've got to detect, detect anomalies, detect strange behavior, use machine learning to do those things, and I think that's the next frontier.
Right. So in my view, I see, again, three things. One is in terms of the mistakes that they're making when they move to cloud, like infrastructure cloud. Some think that, hey, firewalls are good enough. The infrastructure provides what the cloud provider provides in terms of firewalls. I can now prevent everything because I have a firewall around the workload that I'm moving. That's a big mistake. I mean, firewalls are important. Network level protection is important. If you go up the stack to say you want intrusion prevention, maybe the provider provides or you need to bring your own. But it doesn't stop there in terms of the application perimeters and protection I was talking about. Having access management capabilities, or you're deploying a cloud gateway, an access gateway, so that you know who the user is. You can prevent unauthorized users coming in, as well as application level attacks. More and more, it's just not about the network attacks. It's layer 7 and above. SQL injection is still a top threat. How are you going to protect it? So having a cloud access gateway that can deal with user management, user access management, as well as application protection is an important thing. Firewalls are not good enough. So that's point one. Point two, when it comes to data, people say, oh, I can encrypt the storage and I can get the data and I'm good enough. I've protected all my data. Well, it may give you a check mark against compliance, right? Being compliant doesn't always mean you're secure. So having data protection, data encryption is good, an important part, but what good is it if you encrypt it, but your application who have access to the data has vulnerability of SQL injection, right? So, or it has vulnerabilities from a mobile access. So having a view and scanning the applications and protecting the application layer attacks is an important part of the equation so that you protect the application that serves up the data. And the third one, when you talk about visibility, cloud providers do provide logs. They provide infrastructure logs. It's good. Amazon provides it, IBM provides it, Azure provides it, but they're not good enough because for a holistic security intelligence, it's just not what's below the hypervisor or below in the platform case. You want full visibility in the context of the hybrid cloud. You want to know what's happening in your enterprise, whether a user is traversing through an enterprise in the cloud, back to your information system, on-premise. If so, having that full visibility on the device, the user, the application, and the threats with the context around what maybe the other attacks going on will give you more flexibility. So I would say, again, those three areas, people just assume it's just firewalls are enough, or data encryption is enough, or just the logs are enough. They aren't. You need to think about user management, access management, application protection, as well as having holistic hybrid cloud visibility.
Okay. So I also wanted to throw in two fast points. The first point with challenges with going to cloud, I think, as both the gentlemen hit on, is traditional security pros who are used to having the defense in depth kind of modes of operation are forced to stop looking at the asset and start looking at the data when a cloud initiative comes up. Okay, because the asset perspective of this pretty much goes out the window, and so they get outside their comfort zone, and that's what forces the stall of the project, where there's some cost didn't get factored in because they didn't forecast these efforts that were required, or just a project schedule. Obviously because they have to do extra analysis on something that wasn't planned because they didn't realize the extra steps you had to do from a cloud deployment. The second point I wanted to make is based on my own experiences as well as looking at SurfWatch data every day. Is our adversaries want typically two primary things. They want privilege escalation and they want freedom of movement. Okay, so those are the two primary objectives. If I can get a credential and go, get into a box and look at the data and maybe poke around, see if I can get some extra privileges by exploiting a localized vulnerability, or see where that user can get to within the organization. If it's an HR credential, obviously they're going to probably have a lot of access to privacy type information or any kind of thing like that. They always want privilege escalation and freedom of movement, the two core motivations of any human being hacker, right? That's what they want. And when you look at cloud initiatives, you got to answer those two questions. That when I push data out to the provider, how can I validate that something malicious is not occurring? If I don't know what normal looks like, how do I know when something abnormal is happening? And I think that's where you get into the negotiation and the partnership with the cloud provider, because you may not have the same incident response, enterprise monitoring, or forensic capabilities in the cloud. And you need to be able to answer that question. Logically, the cloud provider can do many, many things. You just have to make sure that you're working with the cloud provider security team to say, hey, if our incident response process kicks off, what is the cloud provider's role in that incident response and breach response? I don't see that asked enough. I see it asked very, very little. It's more so a CIO type questions. How fast can I get it out there and get it up and running? It's never, if we're breached, can I do forensics on it? Can I recover data? Can I find out the kill chain of what the heck happened? The cloud provider's not going to be in the news. Your company's going to be in the news, and you better be able to answer that question. And so make sure those two angles are looked at very, very closely when you do a cloud project.
I'll just reiterate, I think the visibility is critical, and you do need to add additional tools. And what you get, the raw data is often there with the cloud providers, but not always. They're looking for different things. So you need better visibility tools, but also increasingly you need intelligent tools that are separating out the noise. I think the big problem with the Target breach was that people didn't respond to alerts that were there. The red lights were going off. So dialing that in, having anomaly detection that's intelligent and has the right threshold of false positives, I think is an ongoing challenge. But need good dashboards, good visibility, but you also got to have the people and the processes to respond appropriately when the lights go off.
Yeah, adding to that, right? I mean, what we see is an important step is as you gain that intelligence, right? Security intelligence as to what's going on. That Willie talked about, Adam also talked about having a baseline. If you don't know what the normal behavior is, how do you know? Weaving that in with threat intelligence. So we have, say, our IBM's X4 security researchers crawling the net every day, figuring out what attacks are going on. Our trustier researchers are looking at malware and mobile malware. So we have the intelligence, and what we start to do, and we see this pattern emerging in the industry, is feeding in that intelligence. Because this way, when one customer gets attacked by a particular malware or a pattern of attack in terms of application behavior in, let's say, Europe, we can prevent that attack from happening to another customer. So sharing that intelligence is important, gaining what we see, as well as now we start to see our customers talking to each other. The Financial Services Forum, FFISAC, is one of the good examples where they're starting to share, because now CISOs are talking to each other. They want to know, hey, I'm getting attacked. What is happening on your side? So that the only way to go against these guys who are coming after us is to join forces. And if so, sharing that intelligence and weaving that into the product in an automated fashion so that you can detect what's going on and take action, be it incident response, be it proactive means to start to control them, are all important steps. So the whole notion of security intelligence, I agree with Willie, is just not about having a monitoring dashboard. It's about gaining the insight. Actually, it's not about the billion events that you see over a week or a month. We have customers have that, but we distill them out to 25 incidents that they need to worry about, because it's high risk data that they can then narrow down to those 10 that they need to investigate further on.
Yeah, we're coming up on the end of the Hangout here. We only got a couple minutes left. So we talked about a lot of different ideas and kind of things throughout the past hour. Wondering maybe if there's say you're a business person is watching, or someone in the C-suite is watching, and is there maybe like one key takeaway that you want them to remember out of all the discussion? Maybe we can just kind of put a button on it with that. Adam, maybe if you want to start and go down.
If I was to give that one bullet point, it's really to do your data governance. Understand what the purpose of going to the cloud provider is in the first place. So obviously you're looking to get something as a service, and that something has to align to the business. And once you define that, you can look at what data is going to get, be a part of that push and pull, and go through that risk assessment and look at the different stages as that data is perceived to move back and forth from the user base and the cloud provider. What is its cybersecurity health at each stage? When it's at rest in cloud provider, what does the security stack look like? When the data is in transit between the user and the cloud provider, what does that security stack got to look like? And then make sure you do your due diligence in that analysis.
Well, I'll add. I think you really need to avoid the checkbox mentality. A lot of people have this mentality that if it says encryption on the compliance requirements, my cloud provider said they'll encrypt it, so done. Or I'm using SSL, check, I'm done. It's just an example where it's a technology that works well, but only if the right people have access to the encryption keys or to the secret token data. So you've got to think through, and you've got to again know your data and think beyond just the letter of the law or what the interpretation is today.
Yep, and I would give my takeaways. By now you have figured out, I think number three is favorite to me in terms of that people can remember, right? So 3 takeaways. 1, cloud is actually an opportunity to do security right. So instead of fearing about it, let's take it on and figuring out how to solve it. 2, you must take a structured approach to cloud security, managing access, protecting data, and gaining visibility. And so using the structured approach, you can actually get a better handle of moving to the cloud. And third, or moving to the hybrid cloud for that matter. And the third, of course, as an IBMer, I just want to finish up saying we do have a comprehensive cloud security portfolio. You probably have seen some of the announcements last month that covers a spectrum of these things with the recognition that it's just not one vendor. We work with Willy and others where customers have deployed their technologies as well. So we have a portfolio that can address you both from technology perspective as well as managed security services perspective to help you in the journey. And with that, it's a journey. We're all in this together, and we'll learn, and we'll help the industry move forward.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day. Appreciate it. I think we had a pretty good discussion.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it. Thanks to
Jeff.
Adam and Willy as well.
Thanks.
Thanks later.
Thanks. Bye.